Malik Thompson was used to being invisible. Not in a sad way, but in a quiet, observing kind of way. He had learned that staying unnoticed was sometimes the best way to survive in places where people already decided who you were before you opened your mouth. At Ridgewell University, a school famous for its history, wealth, and old traditions, Malik stood out for all the reasons that made others whisper. He wasn't born into money. He didn't drive a luxury car or wear designer jackets. He was the scholarship student, the one people said was lucky to be here. Every morning Malik walked across the wide green lawns with his backpack hanging low on one shoulder, earbuds in, head down. Around him, students laughed in groups dressed in the kind of clothes that made it clear they'd never worried about bills. He didn't mind. His world was smaller. Lectures, library, gym, sleep, repeat. He was in his third year studying biomedical engineering, and his grades were the highest in his class. But grades didn't matter much to people who already thought he didn't belong. Still, Malik stayed focused. His mother used to tell him, "You don't need to explain your worth to people who can't see it." She said it the night he got the scholarship letter, tears in her eyes, standing in their small kitchen back home. His dad, a quiet man who had served in the Marines, simply nodded and said, "Make them remember your work, not your words." That sentence stayed with him every single day. Ridgewell wasn't an easy place for anyone who didn't fit its image. The buildings looked like something out of an old movie. Tall stone walls, fountains, and halls filled with portraits of people whose families had donated enough money to have their names carved in gold. Malik often felt like a visitor in a museum that didn't want him touching anything. He didn't talk much in class unless asked. Not because he didn't have ideas, but because he'd learned what happened when he spoke too confidently. Eyes rolled, smirks appeared, and someone would later say, "You're pretty articulate, you know?" As if they were surprised. There were days he went back to his dorm, sat on his narrow bed, and let the frustration settle like dust. Then he'd open his notebook, flip to his research notes, and lose himself in his projects. That was his peace. Numbers and logic didn't judge. But campus life had its shadows. The social divide was everywhere. In the dining halls where tables were claimed by cliques. In the clubs where membership fees quietly pushed out anyone without spare cash. Malik had stopped trying to fit in. He just focused on graduating, getting his degree, and building the life he'd promised his parents. Then came the night of the networking gala. It was one of those events the university bragged about in their brochures, on a formal evening meant to connect students with alumni and industry professionals. Everyone was expected to attend, dressed in their best. For most students, that meant tuxedos and tailored dresses. For Malik, it meant borrowing a suit from a friend one size too big. He spent half an hour ironing the sleeves, making sure it looked as decent as possible. As he walked into the ballroom, the soft music and smell of expensive perfume hit him at once. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, and laughter filled the air. Malik felt out of place instantly, but he straightened his shoulders and reminded himself. He earned his place here. He moved toward the refreshment table, careful not to bump into anyone. He was reaching for a glass of sparkling water when a voice behind him said, "Hey, charity case showed up." Malik froze for a moment before turning. Standing there was Chad Whitmore, a tall, confident guy whose family name was practically campus royalty. His father owned one of the country's biggest tech companies, and Chad never let anyone forget it. With him were two of his friends, both wearing smug smiles. Malik gave a polite nod. "Evening," he said, keeping his tone calm. Chad smirked. "Didn't expect to see you here, man. Thought they'd keep the scholarship kids in the library tonight." The two beside him laughed softly. Malik could feel eyes turning toward them. Not many, but enough to make his skin crawl. He tried to ignore it and turned back to the table. One of the others, a guy named Preston, pointed at Malik's suit. "Nice outfit. Is that vintage?" The laughter grew louder. Malik took a slow breath, his father's words echoing in his mind. "Stay calm. Strength isn't loud." "I'm just here to meet a few people," he said quietly, lifting his glass and taking a sip. Chad wasn't done. "Come on, man, lighten up. We're just having fun. Don't be so serious." He pulled out his phone. "Actually, let's take a picture. You'll want proof you got invited to one of these things." Before Malik could say anything, the phone camera flashed. Chad turned it toward his friends, laughing. "Look, the prodigy of the diversity program front and center." Malik's jaw tightened. He felt heat rise to his face, not from embarrassment, but from anger he had learned to bury. He looked at Chad, his voice firm but even. "You've had your joke. You can stop now." The laughter faded slightly, maybe because people nearby started noticing the tension. Chad pocketed his phone and shrugged. "Relax, man. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." Malik turned and walked away before the words in his head escaped his mouth. He left the ballroom, stepping out into the cold night air. His hands shook slightly as he stood under the courtyard lights. He hated moments like this, not because he couldn't handle them, but because he always had to be the one to take the high road. He walked back to his dorm slowly, headphones in, music low. Inside, his roommate was asleep. Malik sat at his desk and stared at his computer screen, the reflection of his tired face staring back. He didn't notice the message notification that popped up on his phone, a link someone had sent from the campus chat group. When he finally opened it, his stomach dropped. It was the photo Chad had taken, him standing stiffly at the gala, with the caption, "Scholarship Success Story, Proof that Charity Works." The comments were worse. Some joked about him being the university's good deed of the year. Others mocked his clothes. A few defended him, but they were drowned out by sarcasm and laughing emojis. He turned off his phone and sat back in silence. For a moment, all the old feelings came rushing back, being underestimated, being talked over, being treated like he didn't deserve his place. But after a few deep breaths, he closed his eyes. He reminded himself who he was. This wasn't the first time someone tried to humiliate him, and it wouldn't be the last. But they didn't know the kind of discipline he came from. His father had taught him how to hold himself together under pressure, to stay calm when people tried to provoke him. The next morning, Malik woke early and went for a run before class. The crisp air cleared his head. Every stride reminded him that he wasn't defined by other people's opinions. When he got back, he showered, dressed, and walked to his lecture hall like any other day. As he entered, he noticed the whispers. A few students glanced his way, their expressions mixed, some sympathetic, others amused. He ignored them, found a seat in the second row, and opened his notebook. When the professor started talking, Malik wrote down every word, refusing to let anything distract him. By the end of class, he had already pushed the viral post out of his mind, but what he didn't know was that the video from that night, Chad's mocking comments and the photo, had reached further than campus chat groups. Someone had uploaded it to social media, and it was slowly gaining attention. A few users called it out as classist and cruel. Others tagged the university demanding they take action. Malik wasn't aware yet. He was just trying to keep his peace, to stay invisible again. That evening, while eating alone in the cafeteria, he noticed Chad and his friends walk in, laughing loudly. Chad glanced his way, grinning. "Hey, star student. You see our posts doing numbers? You're famous now." Malik didn't respond. He finished his meal quietly, stood up, and walked out. He went straight to the campus gym afterward. The rhythmic sound of gloves hitting the punching bag filled the room. Malik moved with precision. Jab, cross, hook, duck, repeat. He didn't train for violence. He trained for control. Every strike was discipline. Every breath reminded him that he didn't need to prove himself with words. The same calmness that kept him silent in classrooms was the same focus that made him strong here. Outside those walls, people saw a quiet student who didn't belong. Inside, Malik knew he was built from something stronger. The kind of strength that didn't show off. Didn't talk back, didn't need validation. He just didn't know yet that the same people who laughed at him would soon learn exactly what that strength meant, and the whole world would be watching. The next few days were harder than Malik expected. Everywhere he went on campus, there were whispers, sideways glances, and quiet laughter that stopped when he walked by. The post from the gala had spread fast, faster than gossip usually did. People who had never spoken to him before suddenly knew his name, but not for his achievements or the work he spent years perfecting. They only knew him because of a picture, one that turned him into a joke. He didn't say anything to anyone. He kept his routine the same: class, study, gym, sleep. He ignored the messages he got from friends back home asking if the photo was real. He just said it was fine, that it didn't matter. But it did. It bothered him in a quiet way, like a stone in his shoe that he couldn't get rid of. Still, he refused to let it break his focus. By midweek, the story had died down for most people. There was always something new to talk about on campus. A scandal, a party, a rumor. Malik hoped this would fade too, but fate wasn't done with him yet. On Thursday afternoon, he had a presentation in one of his advanced engineering classes. It was the kind of project that could open doors to internships if done well. He had spent weeks preparing, making sure every slide, every calculation, every line of research was perfect. When it was his turn to present, he walked to the front of the lecture hall, plugged in his laptop and began speaking. His voice was calm and steady, every word clear. For a while it felt like everything was back to normal, until he heard laughter from the back of the room. He tried to ignore it, but then a voice called out softly, "Hey, look who it is, the scholarship superstar." The class chuckled. Malik's stomach tightened. He didn't look back. He just kept explaining his work, but the laughter grew louder when a phone screen lit up in the dark showing the same photo from the gala. Someone had set it as their background. The professor didn't notice, too busy grading papers, but Malik saw it. He finished his presentation without breaking. When he sat back down, he took a slow breath and stared at his notes, his fingers gripping the pen tightly. After class, one of the few classmates who respected him, a quiet girl named Nina, walked up and said softly, "You handled that really well." "I'm sorry they're being cruel." He smiled faintly. "It's okay. I'm used to it, but that wasn't true. No one ever really gets used to disrespect. They just learn to live with it." Later that evening, he went to the library to work on his research paper. The place was quiet, warm, and full of the smell of old books. For a few hours, he forgot about everything. Numbers made sense. Equations were fair. The world in his notebook was balanced and logical, something the real world rarely was. As he packed up to leave, he noticed a few students near the entrance whispering and looking at their phones. He didn't think much of it until he stepped outside and checked his notifications. There was a new post on the campus forum, a short video clip from the gala. Someone had recorded Chad's voice mocking him, calling him the diversity hero, and then showing Malik standing there looking uncomfortable. The clip had captions added, jokes typed across the screen, and a laughing soundtrack. It was cruel in a childish way, but it spread fast. By the next morning, everyone had seen it. Even people in other departments were talking about it. When Malik walked into the cafeteria, the noise seemed to fade as he passed. He could feel eyes on him from all directions. A few whispered to each other, others smirked. He grabbed his tray quietly, filled it with some food, and sat alone near the window. Across the room, Chad and his friends were laughing loudly. He didn't need to hear the words to know they were about him. He saw the phone on the table, saw them replaying the video again. He kept eating slowly, pretending not to notice. But when he stood to leave, Chad called out, "Hey, Malik! You should thank me, man. That video's making you famous. Maybe the university will put you in their next brochure." The table erupted in laughter. Malik stopped walking. For a few seconds, the room felt completely silent. He turned slightly, just enough to look at Chad. His face was calm, his voice steady. "I don't need your kind of fame," he said simply. Then he walked out. He could hear the laughter start again behind him, but he didn't turn back. Outside, the wind was cold and the air smelled like rain. Malik sat on a bench near the fountain and stared at the water rippling under the lights. He felt anger somewhere deep inside, but mostly disappointment, not just in them, but in how easy it was for people to follow cruelty instead of kindness. He stayed there a long time, thinking about his parents. His father would tell him to stay composed, to not let emotions control him. His mother would tell him that silence could be powerful, but silence was hard when people mistook it for weakness. That night, Malik couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, replaying the laughter in his head. Around midnight, he gave up and got dressed. He walked quietly across campus to the gym. The place was empty except for the low hum of the lights. He wrapped his hands with the same worn-out bandages he'd used for years. The moment his fists touched the punching bag, everything else faded away. Each hit was controlled, not wild or angry, but focused, like he was punching through the noise of other people's opinions. His breathing found a rhythm. He wasn't fighting anyone. He was fighting the feeling of being powerless. An hour later, sweat soaked his shirt and the fog in his head had cleared. He stood still, chest rising and falling slowly, looking at his reflection in the mirror. He didn't see the quiet scholarship kid everyone mocked. He saw someone stronger, someone built from patience, from hours of effort no one else saw. The next morning he woke early again. He walked into class, the same calm expression on his face. He greeted the professor, took his seat, and pulled out his notebook. The whispers were still there, but softer now. People were starting to lose interest, or so he thought. 2 days later, he found out there was another event coming up, a small party at a private house near campus, hosted by the same group that had mocked him. The invitation had gone out to nearly everyone in their year. He wasn't invited, of course, but someone forwarded it to him anyway, writing, "You should go and show them you're better than that." He laughed softly at the idea. He had no reason to prove himself to anyone, but part of him wanted to stop running from the noise. He wanted to show up, not to confront anyone, but just to exist there unbothered. So that weekend he did. He put on a plain shirt, a simple jacket, and walked to the house. Music thumped from inside and voices spilled out onto the lawn. When he stepped in, a few heads turned in surprise. He just nodded politely and moved toward the kitchen to grab a drink. For a while, no one said anything. But then Chad spotted him from across the room. "Well, look who decided to join us," Chad shouted, grinning wide. "Didn't think this was your kind of crowd." Malik smiled lightly. "It's a free country, right?" The room chuckled. Chad walked over, holding a drink. "Hey, no hard feelings about the video, yeah?" "You've got to admit it was funny." Malik looked at him. "Funny to you, maybe? But you don't realize what that kind of thing does to people." "Oh, come on," Chad said, still smiling. "You're taking this too seriously." "No one got hurt," Malik nodded slowly. "Words hurt more than you think." For a moment, Chad didn't reply. Then he laughed again and clapped Malik on the shoulder. "You're all right, man. You just need to loosen up. Maybe you'll learn how to laugh at yourself." Malik stepped back slightly, his face calm but his eyes sharp. "I already know how to laugh at myself," he said softly. "I just don't find cruelty funny." The room went quiet for a second. Then someone changed the music and the noise returned. Malik took that as his cue to leave. Outside, the cool night air felt good against his skin. He walked home with slow, steady steps, feeling lighter somehow. He knew this wasn't over, that Chad and his friends would keep finding new ways to mock him. But he also knew something they didn't. He wasn't angry. He wasn't scared. He was just waiting, because people like Chad always went too far eventually. And when that moment came, Malik would be ready. Not to hurt anyone, but to remind them that respect is earned, not given, and that silence doesn't mean weakness. That night, he slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, unaware that the next chapter of his story would begin soon. And this time, it would be the world's turn to watch and learn. The following week started quietly. The jokes had slowed down, the whispers had faded, and Malik finally began to feel invisible again, in the peaceful way he liked. He thought maybe things were settling down, but sometimes life tests your calm just to see if you're really as strong as you think. It was a Friday evening. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky orange and gold as students rushed out of the gym, chatting and laughing. Malik was one of the last to leave. He had stayed behind to finish his workout, enjoying the quiet that came after everyone else was gone. He liked the echo of the weights, the rhythm of the punching bag, the sound of his own breathing. It reminded him of discipline, something his father had taught him years ago. When the world gets loud, find your silence. He showered, packed his bag, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The campus paths were nearly empty. A few lights flickered on near the dorms in the distance. He adjusted his hoodie, slipped on his headphones, and started walking toward home. He didn't hear the footsteps behind him right away. They blended into the sound of music in his ears. But as he crossed the parking lot behind the gym, he caught a shadow moving in the corner of his eye. He turned, taking one earbud out. 3 figures stood a few steps away, Chad and his 2 usual friends. Malik sighed quietly. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice calm but tired. Chad smiled like someone who thought they were being clever. "Relax, man. We just wanted to talk." Malik knew better. Nothing good ever started with those words. He didn't move closer or back away. He just stood still, watching them carefully. Chad took a step forward, pretending to be friendly. "You've been acting like you're above everyone lately." "I thought we should clear the air." Malik frowned. "I'm not above anyone." I just mind my business. Preston, the one on Chad's left, laughed. Yeah, sure. That's why everyone's talking about you. You think you're some kind of role model now? The scholarship hero who can't take a joke? Malik exhaled slowly. He didn't want this. He didn't want trouble. Look, he said evenly, you've had your fun. I'm not here to fight with you. Just let it go. Chad's smile faded slightly. Oh, come on. You embarrassed me in front of everyone at that party. You think you can just walk away after that? Malik shook his head. I didn't embarrass you. You did that yourself. That line hit harder than Malik expected. Chad's face changed, his jaw tightened, his expression darkened. His friends looked unsure for a second, like they hadn't planned for things to get tense. But Chad was the kind of person who didn't like feeling challenged. He took another step forward, close enough that Malik could smell the cologne on his jacket. You know, he said quietly, you keep pretending you're better than us. But deep down you know you'll never fit in here. Malik looked him straight in the eye. I stopped trying to fit in a long time ago. Something in his tone, steady, unshaken, made Chad's pride flare. He glanced at his friends, then back at Malik. You really think you can talk to me like that? Malik stayed silent. And that silence was what pushed Chad too far. He reached out and shoved Malik's shoulder lightly, not enough to hurt, just enough to test him. Malik stepped back, calm. Don't do that. Oh, what, you gonna hit me now? Chad taunted. Come on, show us the tough guy you are. Malik took a slow breath. I'm not going to fight you. Because you can't, Preston said from behind him. Malik turned his head slightly. No, he said softly. Because I know where that road leads. For a moment, no one moved. The air felt heavy. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic from the main road. Then Chad, maybe because he couldn't handle being ignored, stepped forward again and grabbed Malik's sleeve roughly. You think you're better than us? He shouted, his voice cracking just a little. Malik pulled his arm free and took a step back. His voice stayed low but firm. You need to walk away, Chad. And then from somewhere nearby a voice called out. One of the students walking past had noticed the commotion and stopped to film, phone raised. The small red light blinked in the dark. Chad saw it but didn't care. Maybe he thought it made him look brave. He pointed at Malik. You see? He's scared. The big genius doesn't have anything to say now. Malik closed his eyes for a brief second, reminding himself to stay calm. But then Chad moved forward again, too close this time, trying to push him back. Malik's patience, tested too many times before, finally reached its edge. He didn't swing or shout. He simply reacted, instinctively, carefully, the way he'd been trained years ago in his father's garage. He stepped aside, catching Chad's arm as he stumbled, turning his body just enough to redirect his balance. Chad didn't fall hard, just enough to lose footing and drop to one knee, more surprised than hurt. The two friends froze. Malik stepped back immediately, his voice steady. I told you, I don't want to fight. But Chad's pride burned too bright to stop. He jumped up, red-faced, trying again, rushing forward without thinking. Malik moved again, not with aggression but control, avoiding the shove and guiding Chad's momentum away. The scene looked almost choreographed, calm against chaos. The student filming gasped softly. Malik's expression never changed. His movements were smooth, deliberate, respectful even. He wasn't fighting. He was managing the situation, protecting himself without striking back. Finally, after a few seconds that felt much longer, Chad backed off, breathing heavily, his friends pulling him away. The look on his face had changed completely. Anger had turned into confusion and maybe a little fear. Malik stood still, hands lowered, voice soft. I don't want to hurt anyone. Just stop. Chad looked at him for a long second, then turned and stormed off with his friends. The student with the phone kept filming for a moment longer before slowly lowering the camera. That was, wow, he said quietly. You didn't even hit him. Malik didn't respond. He just nodded slightly and walked away. That night he sat in his dorm room again, the same way he had after the gala. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the small clock on his desk. He didn't check social media. He didn't tell anyone what happened. He thought about his father again. The years of quiet training, the lessons about discipline, patience, and control. Real strength, his father used to say, isn't about winning a fight. It's about knowing when not to start one. Malik smiled faintly. You were right, he murmured. He didn't know that the video from that night was already spreading across campus. The student who filmed it had uploaded it online, captioned, "They messed with the wrong guy, Charles, and he didn't even fight back." By the next morning, it had thousands of views. People were amazed not by violence but by restraint, by how calm Malik had stayed while being provoked. Comments poured in praising his composure, calling him the real example of strength. At breakfast, whispers followed him again, but they sounded different this time. Admiring, respectful, curious. Some students even nodded at him as he walked by, small gestures of recognition. Malik didn't react. He just went about his day as usual, though deep down a small weight had lifted from his chest. Meanwhile, Chad stayed quiet for the first time in a long while. His friends avoided eye contact with Malik in the halls. The balance had shifted, though Malik hadn't planned it that way. He didn't gloat, didn't post, didn't speak. He just kept being himself. By the afternoon, the video had spread beyond the university. Strangers online were talking about it, about the calm student who refused to be bullied into losing control. They shared it with captions like, "Real power doesn't need anger," and "This is how you handle disrespect." Malik's phone buzzed non-stop with messages, but he ignored most of them. He didn't want fame. He didn't want revenge. He just wanted peace. That night, he went for another quiet walk under the stars, hands in his pockets, the air cool and calm. He thought about how strange life was, how one moment of restraint could speak louder than 1,000 words. He didn't feel proud exactly. He just felt grounded. He knew people would keep talking, but he also knew who he was, and that was enough. The wind rustled the leaves above him as he whispered to himself. Sometimes silence wins louder than sound. He smiled softly, unaware that this small act of composure had already begun to travel far beyond his campus. And soon, the entire world would know the story of the quiet scholar who showed the true meaning of strength without ever raising his voice. By Monday morning, the world outside Ridgewell University had already started paying attention. What had begun as a short clip recorded under a campus streetlight had turned into something much bigger. The video of Malik and Chad was everywhere, shared, reposted, analyzed, and talked about. People weren't just watching it for the confrontation, they were watching it for what it represented. The title under most uploads said something like, "Scholar handles bullies with calm respect." Others wrote, "Real discipline in action." Some just said, "This man's control is next level." In every version, the message was the same: a quiet young man staying calm while others tried to tear him down. There was no violence, no shouting, just composure. That's what made it powerful. When Malik woke up that morning, his phone was full of notifications, messages, emails, social media tags, and hundreds of comments from people he didn't even know. At first, he didn't understand what was happening. Then he clicked on one of the links someone had sent him and saw himself on the screen. He sat there for a long time just staring at the video. The quality was grainy, but the scene was clear. Chad pushing, Malik stepping aside, the calm in his eyes, the control in his movements. Then the caption below it, "When intelligence meets discipline." He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. "Oh no," he whispered to himself. He had never wanted this kind of attention. As the day went on, things got even louder. People stopped him in the hallways to shake his hand. Others smiled or nodded when he passed. The same students who had laughed at him before now whispered words like respect and legend. In one of his classes, even the professor paused before starting the lecture and said, "Mr. Thompson, that was quite the example of composure you showed. You've given this university something to be proud of." Malik smiled politely but said nothing. He wasn't proud. He was uncomfortable. He didn't like being the center of anything. But there was something different about this moment. For once, people weren't mocking him. They were listening. By afternoon, the university administration had caught wind of the story too. They released a short statement saying they were aware of the incident and that they commended the student for handling it maturely. They also announced an internal review regarding the behavior of the others involved. That same day, Chad and his friends stayed out of sight. Rumor had it their parents had been contacted by the school after donors started asking questions. Some of the students who once followed them around now kept their distance. It was strange how fast admiration could turn into avoidance. Meanwhile, the internet kept spinning. Popular pages shared the clip with captions about classism, discipline, and respect. A few journalists reached out, asking if Malik would be willing to do an interview. He didn't respond to any of them. He wasn't interested in becoming a symbol for something. He just wanted to live quietly again. That night, he called his mother for the first time in days. When she answered, her voice was full of concern. "Malik, are you okay? I saw something online about a video. People have been calling me." He laughed softly. "I'm fine, Mom. It's nothing serious." "Nothing serious?" she said. "You're on the internet everywhere. They're saying you handled some boys who were bothering you." "I didn't handle anyone," he said gently. "I just didn't lose control." There was a pause, and then she said in a quieter voice, "I'm proud of you. Your father would be too." That sentence hit him deeper than anything else. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He just smiled to himself and said, "Thanks, Mom." After hanging up, he sat on his bed thinking about how strange it was, how a few seconds of calm had changed everything. By midweek, things had moved beyond the campus. News outlets were running short segments about the Ridgewell University scholar. Some talked about racial and class stereotypes. Others focused on his restraint and dignity. He even saw a clip of a retired Marine, a stranger, saying on television, "That young man's discipline is what real strength looks like." He had never expected any of it, but not everyone was kind. Online, there were a few people trying to twist the story, saying he was playing the victim or that the video was staged. Malik didn't argue or respond. He knew the truth didn't need defending. At school, his days began to feel lighter. The students who used to ignore him now smiled when they passed. Some came up to him asking questions about how he stayed so calm. Others asked if he could teach them self-defense. He always said the same thing. "It's not about fighting. It's about control." He started getting emails from organizations that wanted him to speak about discipline and mental strength. One message came from a local youth center that ran programs for underprivileged kids. They asked if he could visit and talk about handling pressure and staying focused. Malik hesitated at first. He wasn't a speaker, but something inside him told him it might be worth it. So he said yes. That weekend, he went to the center. The place was small but full of energy. Kids laughing, staff members setting up chairs. When Malik walked in, a few of the teenagers recognized him immediately. "That's the guy from the video," one of them shouted. Malik smiled awkwardly and waved. He didn't give a long speech. He just talked honestly. He told them how hard it was to stay calm when people tested you, how anger feels powerful but doesn't build anything lasting. He told them about his parents, his father's lessons, and how silence isn't weakness, it's strength under control. By the time he finished, the room was quiet. A few of the kids nodded. One girl raised her hand and said, "So you're saying it's okay to walk away?" Malik smiled gently. "Yes, sometimes walking away takes more strength than staying." When he left, the director shook his hand and said, "You may not realize it, but you just gave those kids something real." For the first time since the video went viral, Malik felt peace. Maybe there was a reason this happened. Maybe it wasn't just random. That night, back at his dorm, he received another email, this time from a popular podcast that focused on young voices and leadership. They wanted to feature his story. He hesitated again, but agreed, mostly because they said they wanted to talk about calm under pressure, not gossip. The interview was simple and warm. The host asked him how he learned to stay composed. Malik said, "It wasn't something I learned overnight. It came from years of trying not to react. When you grow up where I did, losing your temper could make things worse. My dad taught me that control keeps you safe, and later I realized it also earns respect." The episode gained millions of views within a few days. People connected with his honesty, his simplicity, the way he spoke without trying to impress anyone. He wasn't acting like a hero, he was just real. Meanwhile, on campus, Chad finally showed his face again. He looked different, quieter, maybe humbled. One afternoon, Malik saw him sitting alone outside the library, staring at the ground. For a moment, Malik thought about walking past, but then he stopped. He walked over slowly and said, "You okay?" Chad looked up, surprised. "Why do you care?" Malik shrugged lightly. "Because holding on to anger doesn't help anyone." Chad let out a long sigh. "I didn't mean for all that to happen. I don't know. I was stupid." Malik nodded. "We all make mistakes." Chad met his eyes for a moment, then said quietly, "You didn't deserve how I treated you." "I'm sorry." For a second, neither of them spoke. The sound of birds filled the space between them. Malik finally said, "Thanks. I hope you learn from it." Then he smiled faintly and walked away. That simple moment, not the fight, not the fame, but the forgiveness, was what stuck with Malik the most. By the end of the semester, everything had changed. He wasn't just the scholarship kid anymore. He was known as someone people respected, not because of what he'd done, but because of how he'd handled himself. Professors mentioned him in talks about leadership. Students quoted his podcast lines in essays, but Malik didn't let it change him. He still wore simple clothes, still studied late at night, still spent his mornings running or training quietly. The world might have noticed him, but he hadn't changed who he was. Sometimes when he walked across the campus lawn, he'd see new students staring at him like he was someone special. He would smile kindly, nod, and keep walking. Because in his mind he was still just Malik, the kid from a small neighborhood who worked hard and tried to stay calm when life got loud. And though he didn't say it out loud, he finally understood something his father used to say: "The real fight is not with others. It's with yourself, and peace is the victory." Months passed after the video faded from the internet's front page, but its echo remained. People still remembered the quiet student who didn't lose control when others tried to humiliate him. They still remembered the way he stayed calm, the way he stood up for himself without showing anger. Malik didn't see himself as famous, though. To him, everything had gone back to normal, or at least as normal as it could be. He still woke up early, still worked at the library part-time, and still trained at the small community gym down the street. He preferred it that way. The campus, however, wasn't the same. Something about the mood had shifted since that night. Students seemed more cautious with their words, more aware of how quickly cruelty could turn into regret. Professors noticed it too. The hallways felt less divided, and people started showing more kindness to those who once stood alone. One chilly morning, Malik was sitting under the old oak tree near the science building reading a book. A group of first-year students passed by, talking quietly. He overheard one of them whisper, "That's him." Another said, "Yeah, he's the reason this school changed." Malik looked up and smiled softly. It still felt strange to hear people talk about him like that. He never wanted to be a symbol, but if something good came from it, if others learned to treat each other better, maybe that was enough. Later that week, the university hosted its annual Voices of Leadership event. It was usually meant for guest speakers or student leaders, but this year the dean personally asked Malik to close the ceremony with a short talk. He hesitated at first, unsure if he wanted to stand on a stage again, but after a few days of thinking, he agreed. When the evening came, the auditorium was full. The lights were bright and the quiet buzz of anticipation filled the room. Malik stood behind the curtain, taking a deep breath. He wasn't nervous about speaking. He was nervous about saying something that mattered. When his name was called, he walked to the stage. The applause that followed felt unreal. He didn't see himself as someone to cheer for, just someone who tried to stay true to his values. He started slowly, his voice calm and steady. "I didn't plan to be standing here," he said, looking out at the rows of faces. "A few months ago, I just wanted to finish my studies quietly and move on. But life has a strange way of testing who we are when no one's watching. And sometimes, even when everyone is." The audience listened closely. He continued, "When people mistreat you, it's easy to think the only way to stand tall is to fight back. But real strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's about staying calm when your pride is being tested. It's about knowing who you are and not letting someone else decide your worth." There was complete silence in the room. Even the students who once laughed at him were now listening with full attention. He smiled gently. "I've learned that respect can't be demanded. It has to be earned, not through fear, but through consistency. Through how you carry yourself when things get hard." He paused for a moment, then added, "If you ever feel like you don't belong somewhere, remember, you're not defined by how people see you. You're defined by how you see yourself." When he finished, the entire room stood and applauded. It wasn't loud or chaotic. It was respectful, sincere. People weren't clapping for a viral moment anymore. They were clapping for the person behind it. After the event, several professors came up to him to thank him for his words. A few students asked for advice, and one of them, a nervous first year on scholarship, said softly, "Your story gave me courage to stay here. I was thinking about dropping out." Malik put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Don't give up. You belong here just as much as anyone else." It was moments like that that reminded him how powerful calmness could be. As graduation approached, Malik received several offers, research positions, graduate scholarships, even a few corporate invitations. But instead of rushing into a job, he decided to take a gap year and travel a bit. He wanted time to breathe, to see the world outside the walls of the university. Before he left, he visited the small youth center again, the same one where he had spoken months ago. The kids there remembered him immediately. They had watched his journey like it was their own. One boy ran up to him and said, "I started martial arts because of you." Another girl said, "My mom made me listen to your podcast. It helped me deal with bullies at school." Malik laughed softly and said, "That makes me happy. Just remember, it's not about fighting. It's about knowing you don't have to." That evening, as he left the center, the director stopped him by the door. "You've got something special," she said. "You don't teach with your words. You teach with your presence. That's rare." He thanked her, a little embarrassed, and walked out into the quiet night. The air was cool, the sky painted with faint stars. He looked up and thought about everything that had happened, the mockery, the viral video, the apology, and the quiet peace that followed. He realized that life doesn't always reward you immediately for doing the right thing. Sometimes it takes time, but eventually truth finds its way to light. A few months later, while traveling, Malik received an email from Chad. It was short and simple. "Hey, I just wanted to say thank you again for forgiving me. That day changed me more than I can explain. I'm working on myself now and volunteering, taking things seriously. I hope you're doing well." Malik smiled at the screen. He didn't reply right away. He just closed his laptop and looked out the window of the train he was riding. Outside, the scenery rolled by. Fields, rivers, people walking, the ordinary beauty of life. He thought about how everything had come full circle. The boy who once stood alone in a crowded room was now someone others looked up to. Not because of fame, not because of strength, but because he had stayed true to who he was. Over time, the story of what happened at Ridgewell University became less about the fight and more about what it stood for. It was included in articles about leadership, taught in communication classes, and shared in online discussions about emotional intelligence. Malik's name was mentioned, but it was never the focus. The focus was the message, that dignity and control speak louder than pride or power ever could. Years later, Malik returned to the campus as a guest lecturer. The students who had once been children during his viral moment were now young adults. When he stepped onto the stage again, he felt the same calmness he had that night under the streetlight. He told them the same thing he had always believed. People may not remember what you said or what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. So treat others with respect, even when they don't give it to you first. The applause that followed was quiet but full of warmth. Afterward, as he walked through the campus paths lined with new trees and buildings, he smiled to himself. He thought about how life had tested him and how he had chosen peace over anger, dignity over pride. As he passed the old oak tree where he used to sit and study, he stopped for a moment and placed his hand on the trunk. The memories came back, the loneliness, the laughter, the struggle, and the small victories that built his strength. He whispered to himself, "It was worth it." A group of students walked by laughing together. One of them noticed him and said, "Professor Thompson, can we take a photo with you?" He chuckled softly. "Sure." As they stood together, smiling for the picture, he realized that life had come full circle, not because he became famous, but because he found peace in who he was. That night, as he sat in his small apartment overlooking the city lights, Malik wrote in his journal, something he hadn't done in years. He wrote, "Strength isn't about fighting. It's about patience. Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you show. And peace isn't given. It's earned through understanding." He closed the notebook, leaned back, and smiled. Somewhere far away, a new video was probably going viral. Someone else's story, someone else's lesson. But Malik didn't care about being viral anymore. He cared about living quietly, truthfully, and with purpose. and as the city lights flickered outside his window, he felt a calm sense of closure. Not the kind that ends a story, but the kind that begins a new one. Because for Malik, the fight was never about proving anything. It was about becoming the kind of man his father raised him to be. Strong, humble, and at peace with himself, and in that peace, he finally found what he had been searching for all along. Respect that didn't need to be asked for because it was already earned.